Hi, I'm Jay Reed. I'm a psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And today I'm going to talk about the inner life of the child who's scapegoated by a narcissistic parent. Today's video builds on the content from the last few weeks, which really described the psychology of the narcissistic parent and why they are so kind of overdetermined to scapegoat a particular child. And then in last week's video, we talked about the qualities of the child that often earmark him or her to become the scapegoat. And in a nutshell, if the child possesses, in essence, good qualities or qualities that the narcissist envies, look out, because that creates an immediate threat to the narcissist's very fragile sense of self-esteem. Those good qualities that this kind of child possesses actually could evoke the narcissist's own sense of worthlessness that they are so constantly ejecting into and seeing in others, rather than feeling and taking accountability for it themselves. With that sort of framework having been laid, I'd like to now turn to the inner experience of the scapegoated child, him or herself. That really is sort of the primary reason, for any of these videos and this whole sort of these source of information to pop up. It's the folks who've suffered in this role, I think, who've really kind of created these online communities and educated each other, certainly therapists, in the experience, what it's taken to survive, and these incredibly, I think, hopeful messages of how it can be recovered from. And we'll get to those other dimensions of this process in subsequent videos. So now, what it's like in the life of a scapegoated child. It's important to just do a quick refresher of how the narcissist must find that child as the worthless one. And what often happens is they marshal their leverage with other family members to collude with that message and even belief system in the family. There's a process I've described before where the narcissist finds that state of their own worthlessness, sense of their own worthlessness, to be intolerable, and in an unconscious manner actually perceives that worthlessness in this scapegoated child. And then as they sort of perceive it, they then act in ways to coerce or influence the child to identify with that worthlessness, him or herself. For the scapegoated child, this is sort of a fairly steady diet. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse as the scapegoated child, can count on maybe one hand the times they've been shown approval or credited for the very real good qualities they possess. They are sort of like seen through this kind of lens filter or miasma, really, of badness that is not theirs, but is wholeheartedly claimed by the other members of the family, particularly a narcissistic parent, to be the child's badness, not their own. And there's, for the narcissistic parent, so much at stake for the child and other family members, but particularly the scapegoated child, to comply with what the narcissist is projecting onto that child, for the child to, in essence, identify as the bad one or the worthless one. If the child fails to do that, or let's say the child has an ally from the outside, the narcissist, I would submit to people that the narcissist would feel like their entire kind of psychological organization is under grave threat, and they will sort of do anything to enforce that compliance. There often is zero concern about being caught in a lie, only to highlight how dire the situation is for the child, that it is sort of mandated maybe even in an existential sense, that they go along with how they're being treated, that they sort of say, I am the bad one, and internalize it, because the narcissistic parent cannot psychologically tolerate anything else. And so one way they might not go along with this narcissistic parent is just in the simple act of thinking good things about themselves. The scapegoated child has learned that feeling pride about who he or she is actually is not an adaptive tack to take when trapped with their narcissistic parent. It is likely met as an act of provocation by the narcissist, and in this sort of sordid world of the kind of like insistence that the child be the worthless one, you could maybe understand that it is seen as a provocation by the narcissist, because the narcissist is saying, you're the worthless one and you better stay that way. And if the child dare think otherwise of himself in a good way, himself or herself, then he or she is not cooperating with the narcissistic parent. And then what will likely happen is that the narcissistic parent will up the ante in their efforts at coercing the child to know themselves as the worthless one. And that can get really ugly, whether it's worsening emotional abuse, physical abuse, you name it. It will likely get employed or can get employed. The scapegoated child is also seen as the enemy of the family. Oftentimes, if there's other siblings, and certainly the other parent, can get mad at that scapegoated child for making the narcissistic parent mad. It's quite a recursive, insidious process, right? That like it's sort of predetermined that the narcissist is going to find the scapegoated child as the one who's to blame. And then the other family members oftentimes will sort of gang up on the scapegoated child and sort of look at them askance and with derision, sort of saying like, why are you so troublesome? Why do you always have to make, in essence, the narcissistic parent so angry? It's in essence your fault to the scapegoated child, not the sort of cruel, malevolent intentions and behavior that's so apparent in the narcissistic parent. And I believe that this kind of like collusion in the other family members is often driven by self-preservation, that, you know, this sort of better you than me ethos that can be part of these kinds of family systems. There can be a relief enjoyed by the other family members that they are not the one bearing the brunt of the narcissistic parent's abuse. So for the scapegoated child, there's this, oftentimes from the beginning of, as long as they can recall, an experience of not having safety in their own families. As mentioned before, they're often talked about when they leave the room or when they're out of the physical presence of their other family members, derided. They often have the experience of sort of being harassed, like you can't kind of walk into a room without something wrong being found out about you. And that harassment is sort of like this kind of incessant criticism that kind of just hovers and kind of follows a scapegoated child kind of in whatever he or she does. It's a very grim, subjective reality to have to endure. There's very little room for just play, fun, because one is always sort of being watched, I think, and sort of fault found with. And so, you know, the kind of like unguardedness needed for kind of levity and humor and fun and play to emerge is just not available for the scapegoated child. And what will often happen is that the other family members are afforded such levity because they aren't as under attack. And in some of the worst kind of, I think, some of the most sort of unjust scenarios, the the scapegoated child can kind of get further problematized, and so sort of being the one with the emotional problems, like, oh, he or she never laughs or takes part in the fun. Well, that stands a good reason, because every time the person tries to join in the family's kind of merriment, they're quickly found to be doing something wrong, to have ruined things, and yet it just becomes another way to kind of pathologize the scapegoated child. So, in summary, the scapegoated child faces the two worst parts about attachment trauma. The first is that the scapegoated child is implicitly abandoned. As mentioned in the process that I've described, how the narcissist is finding the worthlessness in the child, there's no empathy nor care for that child's inner experience when he or she is put through it by the parent. And that is an implicit abandonment. The message is, I need you to perform a function for me, and I don't care how it affects you. In addition, there's the actual sort of attack happening, whether it's emotional, physical, sexual abuse. I mean, all these ways of attacking the scapegoated child are also happening. So the very real threat to the scapegoated child's safety is there too. And that's the other sort of worst form of attachment trauma, or in essence, injuries suffered at the hands of the people we're born expecting to be able to trust and who are going to protect us the most. That's the other worst trauma. One woman in the field, Janina Fisher, says, the fears of the attachment of folks who faced attachment trauma can be boiled down to two things: annihilation and abandonment. And I find that to be true, and particularly relevant for what the scapegoated child has endured. Importantly, what I have found is that the scapegoated child possesses a reservoir of resilience, where they are able to kind of go and live their lives, often unconsciously, in ways that reflect their actual good qualities. But because of the abuse they've been put through, it is very dangerous for them to acknowledge and recognize those good qualities they possess. But they're sort of doing it on the sly. I mean, so many folks who face this kind of abuse have established really good friendships, really good romantic relationships, are respected in their fields. They may hold caveats about that, consciously, is like, well, I'm fooling people, or if they only knew, those kinds of things. But what I found, I think the good news is that no, those are very real aspects of who these people are. And I think in the process of recovery, there gets to be more of a congruence with these ways they actually are in the world, and then the safety they feel in knowing that about themselves. So it's sort of a good news that gets to be learned as it grows to feel safer to expect to be treated well in relationships outside of the narcissistic family. Okay, well, that was today's video on the inner life of the scapegoated child. Next week, we'll discuss the first of several beliefs that are often held as a consequence of being scapegoated by a narcissistic parent. After we get through those beliefs, we'll then turn towards the process of recovery in earnest. So I hope everyone's continuing to stay safe as we get to the end of 2020 here. And I'll look forward to posting again next week.